On the morning of May 24th, 1943, a 10-year-old Hungarian boy named Tibor stepped off a cattle train at Auschwitz with his mother and his twin brother. A smiling man in a pressed SS uniform walked down the line of terrified prisoners. He was young, handsome, with dark hair and white gloves. He handed Tibor a piece of candy. He called himself Uncle Mengele. 3 weeks later, Tibor's twin brother was dead, killed by a lethal injection directly into his heart. Mengele performed the autopsy himself. Tibor survived. He spent the rest of his life unable to sleep without the lights on. This is not a war movie. This is not a dramatization. Every word you're about to hear is documented history, verified by survivor testimony, Nuremberg trial transcripts, and declassified Allied intelligence reports. You are watching the History Chronicle, where forgotten history gets the voice it deserves. If you have never subscribed, do it right now. This is the kind of history they don't teach in school, and the kind the world cannot afford to forget. August 20th, 1947. Nuremberg, Germany. After 8 months of testimony, 23 defendants, most of them licensed, educated physicians, stand before a military tribunal to hear their sentences. The evidence against them has been devastating. Hundreds of survivors took the stand. Thousands of pages of the defendants' own meticulous documentation were submitted as evidence, because the Nazi doctors recorded everything. 7 defendants are acquitted. 9 receive prison sentences ranging from 10 years to life. 7 are sentenced to death by hanging. But one man, the most prolific of them all, is not in that courtroom. He is already gone. To understand what happened inside the camps, you need to understand the structure that made it possible. After Nazi Germany began occupying Europe in 1939, millions of people, Jews, Romani, Slavic populations, people with disabilities, were stripped of citizenship, property, and legal protection. By 1942, Heinrich Himmler had issued direct authorization for medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners. Doctors were given formal SS rank, military funding, and complete immunity from any professional consequence. The experiments were organized around 3 goals: improving survival rates for German military personnel in extreme combat conditions, testing new pharmaceutical drugs and treatments, and advancing the racial ideology of Aryan supremacy through forced sterilization and genetic research. What followed was the largest organized medical atrocity in recorded human history. At Dachau concentration camp, SS physician Dr. Sigmund Rascher, with Himmler's direct written approval, ran high-altitude experiments beginning in 1942. Prisoners were sealed into low-pressure chambers that simulated altitudes of up to 21,000 meters, roughly 68,000 feet, nearly twice the cruising altitude of a modern commercial aircraft. The goal was to determine survivability limits for Luftwaffe pilots ejecting from damaged aircraft. Rascher's own records, recovered after the war, describe prisoners foaming at the mouth, losing consciousness, and dying in convulsions while he watched through the chamber window and wrote notes. The freezing experiments were documented with the same chilling precision. Prisoners were submerged in tanks of ice water with thermometers inserted into their rectums to track core body temperature. Rascher recorded the exact moment each subject lost consciousness, the exact temperature at time of death, in the methods used to attempt resuscitation, including immersion in boiling water and being forced to lie against the bodies of women brought from the camp brothel. One survivor, a Polish prisoner named Kazimierz Zamorski, testified at Nuremberg that he watched 7 men die in a single night during these experiments and was ordered to drag their bodies out before morning roll call. Rascher himself was eventually arrested, not for killing prisoners, but for fraud. He and his wife had been falsely claiming to have given birth to children they had actually kidnapped in an attempt to impress Himmler with their fertility. He was executed by the SS in Dachau in April 1945, weeks before Allied liberation. The seawater experiments at Dachau, overseen by Dr. Hans Eppinger, involved subjecting prisoners, primarily Romani men, to nothing but salt seawater for up to 12 days. Survivor testimony described men so deranged by thirst that they tore open the mop bucket drains with their fingernails and licked moisture off the stone floors. Eppinger committed suicide with poison before he could be arrested in 1946. At Ravensbrück, the all-female concentration camp north of Berlin, Heinrich Himmler's personal physician doctor. The Karl Gebhardt ran what became known as the sulfonamide experiments, one of the most methodically documented war crimes of the entire Nazi medical program. The backstory matters here. In 1942, SS General Reinhard Heydrich, one of the chief architects of the Holocaust, was assassinated in Prague by Czech and Slovak resistance fighters. He died of sepsis days later. Himmler blamed Gebhardt for failing to use sulfonamide antibiotics aggressively enough during treatment. To vindicate himself and to prove the drug's limitations, Gebhardt designed experiments at Ravensbrück to test sulfonamide under battlefield conditions. He and his assistants, including the only female defendant at the doctor's trial, Dr. Herta Oberhäuser, used hammers and surgical tools to deliberately fracture the leg bones of female prisoners. They infected the open wounds with combinations of bacteria, streptococcus, gas gangrene, tetanus, then monitored whether sulfonamide could fight the infection. Some women received the antibiotic. Others were the control group, infected but given nothing. All of them were conscious during the procedures. 74 women were subjected to these experiments. They were known afterward as the Ravensbrück rabbits, a term they used themselves bitterly because they felt like lab animals. After the war, 15 survivors of these experiments traveled to Nuremberg to testify. They lifted their skirts in the courtroom to show the judges their scarred, mangled legs. Several witnesses in the gallery fainted. Gebhardt was convicted and hanged on June 2, 1948. The Oberhäuser received a 20-year sentence but was released in 1952 and worked as a family physician in Germany until survivors identified her publicly, and she was stripped of her medical license in 1960. Josef Mengele arrived at Auschwitz in May 1943 at age 32. He held a medical doctorate and a PhD in anthropology. He was decorated with the Iron Cross for bravery on the Eastern Front after pulling 2 soldiers from a burning tank under fire. By every external measure, he was brilliant, courageous, and accomplished. He was also a true believer, a fanatical devotee of Nazi racial science, who saw Auschwitz not as a death camp, but as the greatest research opportunity in history. Mengele was fixated on twins because of a specific scientific theory rooted in the work of eugenicist Ottmar von Verschuer and his mentor at the University of Frankfurt. The theory held that studying identical twins could isolate hereditary traits from environmental ones, unlocking the biological blueprint for producing more Aryan children and eliminating genetic impurities. Mengele believed he could use this research to biologically engineer the future of the German race. He stood personally on the selection ramp, something most SS doctors rotated through as a duty, because he wanted to be there. He was looking for his subjects. When he spotted twins, he would shout enthusiastically and pull them from the line himself, sometimes separating them from parents being marched directly to the gas chambers. Between 1943 and 1944, Mengele registered approximately 1,500 pairs of twins. Fewer than 200 pairs survived the war. His experiments included deliberate infection of one twin while keeping the other as a control subject, then killing both and performing comparative autopsies. He performed surgery, amputations, organ removals, without anesthesia. In the most infamous documented case, he attempted to surgically conjoin 2 Romani twin brothers by connecting their veins and organs at the back, trying to create artificial Siamese twins. Both boys developed massive infections and died screaming in agony within days. Their mother, who was a prisoner in the camp, managed to obtain morphine and killed them herself to end their suffering before Mengele could return. His obsession with heterochromia, the rare condition of having 2 differently colored eyes, led him to inject methylene blue and other caustic chemicals directly into the eyes of prisoners, attempting to permanently alter eye color. The procedure caused excruciating pain, severe infection, and blindness. Mengele then killed the subjects and had their eyes surgically removed and mailed to Berlin, where his mentor von Verschuer cataloged them. A collection of these preserved eyes was discovered by Allied forces after the war, pinned to a wall in a Berlin laboratory like an entomologist's collection of butterflies. Among the twins Mengele selected were 10-year-old Eva and her sister Miriam, Hungarian Jews who arrived at Auschwitz in May 1944. Eva and Miriam survived. Their parents and two older sisters were killed in the gas chambers on the same day the twins were pulled from the selection line. Eva Moses Kaur spent decades speaking publicly about what she endured: the weekly blood extractions, the injections of unknown substances that caused her legs to swell and her fever to spike to near-fatal levels, the constant awareness that if she died, Miriam would be killed in a comparative autopsy. In 1995, Eva did something that stunned the world. She publicly forgave Josef Mengele, not for his sake, but for her own. "Forgiveness," she said in interview after interview, "is the best revenge. It gave me the power to take my life back." She founded Candles, Children of Auschwitz Nazi Deadly Lab Experiment Survivors, and spent 30 years educating students worldwide until her death in 2019 at age 85. Her story is one of the most extraordinary acts of personal resilience in modern history. When Soviet forces approached Auschwitz in January 1945, Mengele fled westward with a box of his research files. He was briefly held in an Allied prisoner of war camp, but released. The camp guards didn't know who he was. He was not yet on any list. Using forged papers in the Odessa Escape Network, a clandestine organization of former SS officers, he traveled to Genoa, obtained a Red Cross humanitarian passport under the name Helmut Gregor, and sailed to Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1949. He lived in Argentina openly for years. He socialized. He attended German expatriate community events. Israeli Mossad agents tracked him to Argentina in 1960, the same operation that captured Adolf Eichmann. But Mengele had already moved. He slipped to Paraguay, then to Brazil, where he lived on a farm near Sao Paulo under the name Wolfgang Gerhard. On February 7, 1979, Josef Mengele, the man who destroyed more than 1,000 children, suffered a stroke while swimming at a beach resort in Bertioga, Brazil. He drowned. He was 67 years old. His grave was marked with the false name he had used for years. His true identity wasn't confirmed until DNA testing in 1992. He was never charged, never tried, never handcuffed. At the doctor's trial, the defense argued that the experiments were military necessities. Some defendants pointed out, correctly, that no international law explicitly prohibited medical experimentation on human subjects. That legal vacuum was closed forever by the Nuremberg Code of 1947. 10 principles establishing that voluntary informed consent is the absolute foundation of any legitimate medical research. The code became the basis for the Declaration of Helsinki, and ultimately for the ethical frameworks governing every clinical trial, every drug test, and every research study conducted anywhere in the world today. Modern science officially rejects Nazi experimental data, not because it contains no information, but because incorporating it would mean treating the deaths of those prisoners as an acceptable price for knowledge. It is a moral line the scientific community has chosen, permanently, never to cross. The survivors of these experiments spent their lives carrying wounds that never fully healed, physical disabilities, nightmares, a grief so deep it had no name. Most of them never received compensation. Many were never officially recognized as victims until decades after the war. They deserve better. History owes them the truth. This has been the History Chronicle. If this story affected you, if you believe these names and these crimes deserve to be remembered, then subscribe right now, share this video, and leave a comment below telling us which part of this history you had never heard before. Every share is an act of remembrance. Every view keeps these voices alive. We'll see you in the next episode, because history never stops.